Every night. I hear them. The soft patter of tiny feet scurrying behind the walls. The chilling whispers of children long forgotten. Their laughter is a haunting melody that curdles my blood. Their cold, empty eyes, always watching, waiting for the perfect cold, empty eyes, always watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This is their home, and they will never let me forget it.
The head in the wall was crusted and decayed, mummified in its plastic shroud, the withered face open-mouthed in a scream, or maybe the jaw had loosened as the muscles decayed. The plastic is what held in the smell, though I do vaguely remember sometimes an odor permeating, especially during steamy summers. I was always told the smell was garbage. Alongside the head, other parts sat similarly stored in plastic bins. When I finally saw the corpse from the wall reassembled, it was hard to believe that anyone would do this to another human being. Harder still to imagine it was my own father who committed such horrific acts. When asked why he'd done it, my father always gave the same answer. As I recount the story now, I picture him in that interview room. How he must have looked facing the police. Victor Chen was a small, nervous, almost delicate man. He must have been petrified, his eye swollen shut and his lip bleeding, his hands rubbing and rubbing, nails digging deep into the flesh of his wrists and palms as they peppered him with the same questions over and over. Why? Why children? Why in the walls? Why? I had to. Tears running down his cheeks, this was all he would say, I had to. Why little kids, you sick bastard? I imagine the officer's sneer, imagine how my father cowered as the men struck him. We know what you did to them. Why you wanted them. And no. I never did anything to them. I just killed them. You just killed them. Yes. You expect me to believe? I had to. If the interrogation went anything like my father said, that officer beat him within an inch of his life. Only after he was on the floor, groaning and at the brink of unconsciousness, did the second officer intervene, pulling back the violent one. They hustled my father back into his chair. The calmer officer spoke in measured tones. Now Mr. Chen, tell me what happened to Mary Lewis, Kaylee Jensen, Kyle Sanderson, Terry Choi, Evie Connor. You obviously put a lot of thought into everything. Packing them into the walls takes a lot of materials and preparation. You must have had a reason for choosing them. What was it? But he would not say. When I confronted him, it did not go much better at first. He wouldn't speak for ages. Just sat there with his head down and tears dripping from his eyes. Finally his gaze lifted. I suppose you think I'm a monster, he whispered. Are you? I asked. He burst into sobs. Through his hands, his muffled, repeated line, I had to. My father's crimes were not motivated by any of the reasons commonly ascribed to serial killers. They were not sexual in nature, and while most of the victims were minors, they ranged in age from 8 to 18, and he also murdered his own brother. Regardless of who they were, all bodies received the same treatment: dismemberment, plastic wrap, concealment in the walls. Some were childhood friends of mine, though none of them close. He chose carefully, it seems, meticulous with his murders as with his blueprints. He was an architect, a trade that served him well. And yet growing up, I never had the slightest inkling of what lay within our walls. Indeed, I could not have imagined it. My father was shy and soft-spoken in public, warm and kind in private. What I remember most about him is his laughter. The way his eyes would crinkle. He was devoted to the memory of my mother, who passed away when I was so little I could not remember her. In later years I often saw him with dark circles under his eyes, and his smile became rare. Our relationship was strained by my teenage rebelliousness. But one thing I was certain of growing up, he loved me more than anything or anyone in the world. Yet when I look back now, I can see that there were always hints of his darker tendencies. For example, when I was 7 years old, he taught me to butcher a pig. Now, to my mind, this is not something to expose to a small child. But there we were, a pig splayed out on the basement table, its eyes glassy and mouth gaping, blood dripping from its severed head onto his shoes. He explained that rather than buy meat in expensive packaging, we could save money by butchering and freezing the meat ourselves. Of course I shrieked hysterically. He clicked his tongue, chopping off its trotters and dropping them in a bucket as he reminded me how I loved bacon. And pretending the bacon just magically appeared in an aisle in the grocery store was a kind of dangerous magical thinking that allowed all sorts of atrocities. You can do anything evil, he declared, if you sanitize it in plastic. A chilling statement in retrospect. Then there was the time my uncle came to work for us. My father did not like Uncle Rudy. I have a better understanding of why now, but at the time, all I knew was that Uncle Rudy was perpetually borrowing money. At the urging of my grandparents, my father, who was never rich but made enough to live comfortably, hired Uncle Rudy to do some work on the exterior of the house. There were strict parameters my uncle had to follow. Some of these were sensible, such as not to consume alcohol. But other precautions struck me as especially harsh. For example, my uncle was only briefly allowed to come inside for bathroom breaks, and at all other times, even for lunch or water breaks, he had to remain outside in the sweltering sun. But as was often the case in those days, my father was not always present to enforce these rules. One day when I got into trouble at school, my father could not be reached. It was Uncle Rudy who picked up the phone and agreed to come and get me. At home, he gave me a Coke. My father only let me have soda occasionally, claiming it was bad for my teeth, and told me the girls who bullied me were a bunch of... Thereafter, while my father was away at work, I would invite Uncle Rudy to sneak inside to watch TV with me. He was always smiling and chummy. And when he started drinking beer while I had soda, it was our little secret. We were both breaking my father's rules. Then one day, as we sat watching TV on the sofa, he squeezed me and told me what a special little girl I was. Didn't I know how special? His breath stank of beer, and his sweaty, hairy arm draped over me. I didn't like his face so close but didn't know what to do or say, and he kept rubbing my back, his hand sliding under my cotton shirt, his fingers hot on my skin. He leaned his head close to mine, his lips against my ear, speaking softly like he was trying to make me feel better, only he made my insides squirm. That was when my father came home. Uncle Rudy withdrew immediately as the door opened, but my father must have suspected something because his eyes narrowed to slits. He sent Uncle Rudy outside to finish working and right away sat me down to ask me what happened. Oh, he was just asking me about school. For some reason, I felt compelled to protect my uncle. My father's eyes honed in on the beer. Was he drinking? Only a little. Sadie love, I promise you are not in any trouble. No trouble, you hear. But it's very important that you tell me the truth. Was he sitting very close to you? Touching you? I couldn't meet my father's keen eyes. I nodded, biting my lip. Feeling like I'd betrayed Uncle Rudy. But also, I hadn't liked his closeness, his beer-stinking breath. My father was always clean and smelling of cologne or aftershave, and not sweaty and breathy like Uncle Rudy. I explained, he was rubbing my back. Like this. My father rubbed my back. Under my shirt, I admitted. He went pale. But just as quickly, his expression smoothed over. Well, sweetheart, we'll talk a little more later, HM. Thank you for telling me. You're a very bright girl. And the girls at school who've been bullying you are all stupid heads. I giggled. They are. Big dumb stupid heads. The biggest and the dumbest. My father poked me, which made me squeal, and then told me to go on up to my room, read some books and we'd go get ice cream later. I just need to have a quick word with Uncle Rudy about the yard. All right. Go on then. I went upstairs, smiling. But I knew he was putting me on, and so I snuck back downstairs to eavesdrop. As I neared the office door, I caught my uncle's booming protestation. Wah, Jesus flipping Christ, I was comforting her, that's all. What the hell do you think I was doing? The screech of a chair against the floor. Through the gap in the door, I could just see my father lunge, gripping my uncle by the shirt. My father was, as I've mentioned, a slight man, especially compared to my bullish uncle. And yet whatever it was my father hissed into his face, it made my uncle go pale with fear, recoiling as if my father were a spitting cobra. Fucking crazy, burst Uncle Rudy, breaking his grip and storming out. Both of them saw me, but Uncle Rudy just flared his nostrils and bouldered past. I stood awkwardly in the hall, trembling. The feral rage vanished from my father's face, and he rushed over. Oh, Sadie, I'm so sorry. I should have known better. Your grandparents, they begged me to help him. I thought if I had rules. I'm so sorry, my darling. I didn't really understand at the time why he was so distraught. My uncle had done nothing but rub my back and tickle my ear with his whiskers and disgusting beer breath. I didn't know about the other things my uncle had done that my grandparents had hushed up, protecting their eldest son. And even though I'd come out of the encounter unscathed, I think my father still felt the deepest regrets. Things became very strained between him and my grandparents after that. He stopped taking me to visit them. We were isolated, a family of two, another reason, perhaps, that no one suspected what he hid in those walls for such a long time. There was no one in our lives except us. If it's hard for you to reconcile this paternal figure with the bodies dismembered and wrapped in plastic, well, imagine how hard it was for me when I finally figured out what he'd been up to all these years.